Hello and welcome to Computer Tech and More. Today we're going to be taking a second look at the EK loop using my new noise testing methodology. So this is part of my redone series. I've redone my whole noise analysis methodology, but previously I put the microphone really close up to the fan. I have a little short video showing the differences between the new and the old. But in short, I now have a fixed distance using a pole to separate the microphone from the fan, in the hopes of making my fan measurements much more accurate than they previously were. To do the next further iteration of improving my overall data collection analysis methodology, I would like to build a noise isolating box around my just for the specific test chamber. I would like a more accurate anemometer, as well as getting a specific microphone for noise testing. All of this costs a lot of money, and well, if you would like to see this channel succeed and really like my total package of what I'm doing with fan testing, I would greatly appreciate if you hit that subscribe button and consider joining me on Patreon, where all of that income, basically money, would go directly into the next step in noise testing methodology to give you the best fan data on the internet. All right, let's get into the new tests. So we're going to be comparing the original testing methodology versus the new testing methodology. All the rows are in alphabetical order, so the rankings are highlighted or circled. The fan in question is circled. This is actually all 120 millimeter fans that I've tested thus far. In noise normalized testing, you're going to have just the RPM that was running and the amount of airflow it had for that specific test. For 100%, you're going to have RPM, noise level, and how much air it was pushing. And then, of course, we have the ranking. And if you want to know the specifics of what was done for each test, I encourage you to watch the later part of this video. If you are familiar with my channel and know all the tests that I basically have done and will be doing, you could probably just watch this section, but note that this is somewhat incomplete in terms of everything that I talk about. So I'll leave it to you how much you want to actually watch, but this is just kind of a broad overview just to show, hey, this is what it was, this is what it is now. All right, so let's get right into the specifics of what we're actually taking a look at. So first up in the testing is noise normalized through my CPU AirCooler, and we're looking at the EK loop FTP 120. Originally it was ranked 26th, spinning at an RPM of 1,189, moving 1.1 meters per second of air. It is now ranked 23rd at a slightly lower RPM, 1,089, so it lost 100 RPM for approximately the same airspeed. So despite it losing a little bit of performance for the new noise normalized test, so that is 12 decibels versus 40 decibels, but again, the microphone is closer to the fan, so you have to ignore the fact that I'm taking a different measurement, because as you get closer to the noise source, it gets arbitrarily louder. But it's still based off the A12X25 running at between 1,100 and 1,200 RPMs. So that is an excellent result for the EK, the fact that it didn't really lose much ground. It actually gained positioning. At 100% PWM fan signaling, there's no change because it's not taking noise into account. It is just airspeed, and it is ranked 16th. And it was 51 decibels, it is now 27 decibels. And again, the difference in decibel reading is because of the new testing methodology, not because all of a sudden the fan is super quiet. It's just the microphone is further away, so it's quieter. Next up is cooler value. So this is amount of airflow per money. Originally, the EK was ranked 40th. It is now ranked 33rd. In 100% RPM PWM signaling, it was ranked 38th, and it retains that position. For CFM testing, noise normalized, it was ranked 19th. It has lost positioning and is now ranked 23rd. And it's lost CFM value as well for that loss of air speed as well. At 100% PWM fan signaling, it is overall ranked 11th. For CFM value, it was ranked 38th for noise normalized results. It is now ranked 36th, so it went up in position, even though it lost value, relatively speaking. At 100% PWM fan signaling, it was ranked and retains this position at 31. For 6-inch noise normalized mark, it was ranked 22nd. It is now ranked 12th for approximately the same airspeed. And this again is that RPM, same RPM. So this is actually slightly lower than 1.8. It's just rounded to that point. Next up, 11-inch mark, noise normalized. It was ranked 9th and retains that position at 9th, though it does lose a little bit of airspeed due to its reduction in RPM. Next up is the value proposition noise normalized at the 6-inch mark. It was ranked 37th and is now ranked 27th, so overall an improvement in position despite the fact that its value proposition has actually gone down slightly. And last but not least is the 11-inch mark, noise normalized. It was ranked 21st. It is now ranked 17th. So it's gone up in position even though it lost some value. So overall, that is a fairly good result for the EK. Not losing very much ground overall, actually gaining in position compared to the other fans around it. So that is always good to see. And the difference between the RPMs between the old test methodology and the new is just because the microphone is placed further from the fan, so the results vary despite testing. And I just want to get into this real quick. I'm jumping back to my graphs. So with the old testing methodology versus the new testing methodology, with the noise testing, originally I had a plus or minus 4 decibel range for what I would consider accurate within noise testing. And that 4 decibel range, or 4 decibels, means that there's an 8 decibel range. So a fan could be plus or minus, or it could be up to 8 decibels. Every 10 decibels increase in noise is a doubling in noise volume. So that is a huge range. The new test methodology gives me an accuracy of plus or minus 2 decibels. That is about as good as I can get with my current setup, which is why I basically said I would require further assistance from either YouTube or supporters like you to help take me to the next level. Otherwise, I'll keep doing my testing the way I can, and we'll carry on. All right, let's get into the specific graphs and the data. So the first up in specific graphs is my case simulation test. This case simulation test can be looked at in a couple key different ways to get the important data that you may be interested in. The first is, what size case do you actually plan on buying? Because it doesn't make sense to get the best case for maximum long-distance airflow if you're only getting a small case. So I looked at 4 key data points, 6, 9, 11, and 14.5 inches. And each are representative of a different size case category, so an average case in that category size. So the 6-inch mark is representative of a small form factor tower that still has a front to back airflow, not the ultra compact towers like the Fractal Design North that basically intakes from the sides and blows out the top, or ones that are designed to suck in from the bottom and blow out the top, or any configuration similar to that. I'm talking about front airflow to back. You have an air cooler and it's going out the back. If you're talking about radiators, AIOs, whatever, you don't need to ignore this data, but the application is different. So the 6-inch marks can also be used for bottom-mounted fans, or in some cases, that would be the top-mounted ones if you're blowing them into the case. So there I'm talking about a short throw distance. So for example, the Fractal Design Torrent has those fans at the bottom of the case that blow air directly into the GPU. That would be representative of the 6-inch mark. So just allows you to select a fan for your particular application. And I just want to go back to what I was talking about with pressure applications or case designs. If you are getting a small form factor case that is more of a very tight, compact design, where the fans are basically blowing into components as opposed to blowing into empty space to travel through the case, then it's a pressure application. So you're going to be wanting to look at the data for the CPU cooler and for CFM. Those would be good indicators of which fans are good at pushing around obstacles, so the airspeed results. More open airflow is what we're talking about here, as opposed to something that is more pressure oriented. Next up is the 9-inch mark. The 9-inch mark is representative of a small tower. So again, it's front to back airflow to your CPU air cooler. Not a radiator, not an AIO, not a custom liquid cooler setup, a air cooler. Because you want to maintain the maximum amount of airspeed traveling through the case at all times for air coolers, rather than having the fans at the back having to essentially suck the air through. You want it to be as efficient as possible, that the air just travel cleanly through it. If you are using a radiator or AIO, I'm going to get into that in a second after I finish this sort of explanation. So at the 11-inch mark, we're looking at mid-tower cases, something like the Meshify 2C, the Stormtrooper looking case from Corsair. Corsair 550D was my previous case. It fits into this category as well. And then the 14.5-inch mark is the Fractal Design Torrent, where it's just a big tower, something we need a lot of air to travel front to back to just get to the components very smoothly and easily. The other way to look at it is, how good is this fan at actually blowing air? What you don't want to see is a fan just have all of a sudden steep drop off and level out. So just some very basic diagrams. As you run your fan and you're pushing air, there's air in your case. And the air in your case is trying to slow down that central column of air. So you'll never have a perfect cylinder of air traveling down at a constant speed. It'll always slow down a bit. So what you want is a concentrated airflow, so it slows down as little, what they're calling an airflow fan in this diagram and a static pressure fan. I actually disagree with this diagram. It's pretty old, where I think all fans should be a concentrated airflow. But for static pressure, it doesn't matter as much. But if a fan has concentrated airflow, it's more versatile than one that just spews air off to the sides. So if a fan spews air off to the sides, it means it's going to slow down more dramatically than one that has a concentrated airflow that's able to maintain it across the distance of your case, which is ideal for an air cooler. Now, if you are looking at radiators and AIOs, if your radiator is on this side, where my mouse is, so the fan is in a pull configuration, the airflow coming out the fan will be the same if it was an open airflow type. Just the amount of air might be different, meaning it's air velocity because it's having to suck air through another object, through your radiator. But the airflow pattern will be similar or identical. So you actually do want a good fan at constant airflow if you're going to use it in that configuration, so that the air travels through your case to cool, sort of arbitrarily cool every other component in there. So this would be a front mount type radiator I'm talking about. If one is on the top, you still want good clean airflow going through your case, but again, it doesn't quite matter as much because you're just going to be using the radiator to suck the air out anyways if you're doing it chimney style. The only exception is if you're using a back mount radiator, so it would be 120 or 140 single fan rad, which aren't really recommended, but if for some reason you are doing that, then the airflow going through the case really does matter. So that's just kind of a quick explanation of why this actually matters in terms of case airflow. So next up, how do we compare the fan against something? Well, I have a control fan that is based 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14, all Noctua fans, and they're just good in their respective categories, so I blended them together to create my own control fan to base every other fan off of. So it makes it reasonable to compare 140s and 120s all in the same graphs. So what do we see from the EK? Well, it lines up really well with my control fan, which indicates a very good performing fan. Now, it doesn't have the same sort of top end at the short distance, but overall, over the core length of the case for noise testing, very, very close. And my key over here is the name of the fan. Well, this is the size, just continue the name, and the RPM it was running. Next up, we're looking at 100% PW fan signaling, and here the EK it's better than my control fan, which is excellent to see. But if you're running your case fans at 100% PWM, and again, this is case fans without a radiator, then something has gone terribly wrong inside your case. But here's the RPM was running as well as the airspeed. And this just reminded me of another key point. If you're using your radiator in a push configuration, so it won't matter as much that the air is shooting off to the sides, because the radiator will have a tendency to straighten out the airflow as the fan pushes it through. So the fact if a fan spews air off to the side doesn't matter as much in that sort of configuration. That's just a side comment I wanted to say that I forgot to say earlier. All right, how does it compare against other fans? Because it's good to compare against my control, but how does it compare against everything else? Well, here's a small sampling of fans that I consider representative of good, medium fans and poor performers. So kind of the top end of what I consider a medium fan would be the Wonder Snail. So this would be the bottom end of a medium fan or the top end of a bad fan. So it's not completely terrible in noise normalized results. It actually maintains airspeed fairly well. It's just it doesn't have the same sort of grunt at the very beginning that a lot of other fans have. While the bottom of the graphs are represented by the T30, and completely off the graph, just for being able to view other data easily on it, is the NF S12B Noctua's quote-unquote airflow fan. It just isn't that good, honestly speaking. So on here we have the A12X25, we have the Silent Wings 4 Pro, we have the EK sitting right here. So the EK is looking pretty excellent. We have the Arctic P12. So it gives you some good representative marks. But how about 100% PWM fan signaling? Because it's good to look at, well, everything. Well, the Silent Wings 4 Pro now takes off and is in the top position. The T30 is also doing quite well, although I must admit that is there by brute force and is very noisy for it. So RPM and noise, 35.4 decibels with the way I'm doing decibel readings. The Gentle Typhoon is in an excellent position, sort of the bottom end of the very best performing fans. And the NFF, or the NF-A12X25 is sitting right here. So, and just for kicks and giggles, there's the S12B sitting almost completely off the graph. So we have a couple groupings in here where good fans, better fans, best fan, and the EK is sitting in a very good position, showing that it's very good at actually case airflow. Next up, we're taking a look at the 9-inch mark, and I just want to do a brief explanation. So if you notice that on this graph, most of the fans tend to drop off steeply between the 6 and the 9-inch mark, so that's why the 9-inch mark was chosen, because as the airspeed approaches, or actually drops under 0.5 meters per second, it's just incredibly hard for me to get good accurate readings, which is a primary reason why I want to upgrade my anemometer to a higher quality one. Unfortunately, it costs a lot more. But anyways, the 9-inch mark, airspeed versus decibels. And the EK is sitting right here in this dark purple line. If you're wondering about why some of these fans have these little joggles off to the side, that's where I believe that I either hit a harmonic frequency in the fan or the fan acting in my testing apparatus. It is hard to narrow down to exactly which, but my inclination would be it's within the fan, because otherwise it should be more related to RPM than to other factors that I'm seeing within the fan. And the RPM varies across all these fans. So I really don't think it's within my testing apparatus. I think it's actually within the fan. But so if the fan gets noisy a little bit and then comes back to normal and has a nice smooth increase in air speed without getting too noisy. So it actually is fairly quiet despite moving a substantial amount of air, unlike the Silent Wings 4 Pro, where it too pushes a lot of air. It's just doing it in a little bit more noisy matter. So again, every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise value. So just because a line on this graph looks linear, it isn't. It's actually a doubling in value. It just would end up being a very steep looking graph and would be near on impossible to actually read and decipher the data easily. So on this, we have a 2-for-1 graphs. So the first one is RPM versus airspeed through the AirCooler, which is a U12A. On the left side, better fans are going to be sitting in the top left, worse fans are going to be sitting on the bottom right. And once again, we have my control fan in blue. So the left graph is basically a blade efficiency graph. It's how good is this fan at pushing air at a given RPM. So in general, you want a fan to push as much air at as low an RPM as possible, because as RPM increases, so does the fan noise in general. mind, it's not always the case. There are efficiency curves on fans where all of a sudden they peak and get substantially more efficient, as I've come across in some of my testing, but in generally speaking. So what are we seeing here? Well, the EK is certainly a very efficient fan, matching my control fan very closely, which is excellent to see. On the right side here is a noise versus airspeed. So airspeed is vertical, noise is horizontal, and this is a noise efficiency graph. How much air can the fan push for a given amount of noise? Here we see that the EK is underperforming slightly. It catches up a little bit at the top end, but not quite exactly. It's still underperforming my control by a little bit, but I would still say it's a good result from it. I wouldn't say it's excellent. Good is anywhere close to my control. Bad is when you start getting further away. Mine, there are a couple key points that I would consider in the bad category, so you want to stay away from those harmonics. Next, how does it compare against everything else? First, a brief explanation. Over here is a little key. It's got a number with a wattage, so 250 watts equals 3. That's 3 meters per second. That's airflow. So I actually have a series of tests. It's up on my channel where I ran my fans at a number of different PWM fan signals and related that to how much wattage my CPU could draw. So I put it under a CPU load, let it run full speed, hit a thermal max, 91 degrees, and just dropped the PWM fan signal and recorded down what wattage I observed the CPU drawing for that given signal, and I measured the airspeed out the back. So I was able to relate wattage to airspeed. But this is only for my CPU, the i7-11700K, and for my specific cooler, the U12A. So if you have a different CPU than me, if you have a different cooler than me, these wattages will not line up. So then might be asking, how can I use this data? I don't have the same thing. Well, you can use it by, if let's say you have the NFP12 redux, at my noise normalized value, you'd be moving 0.0 meters per second of air. Well, if you upgrade to the A12X25, you'll now be moving 1.3 meters per second of air. Now, how much extra wattage can you draw? I don't know. That would vary. I know what it is for mine. It's listed over here. But you would see an increase in how much power draw your computer could draw for the same amount of noise. The other way to look at it is, if your CPU is locked, you now are allowing your CPU to run cooler for that given clock speed. And the last way to look at it is, you can take this now extra overhead, because it's now moving more air. You can reduce the PWM fan signal, and you can make your computer even quieter. Now, I consider my noise normalized value to be fairly quiet, just a little, but not too bad overall. But for you, that might be too noisy, so you could actually take that extra overhead and drop it down. So now that we have that explanation out of the way, how does the EK look? Well, I call it smack dab in the middle of the graphs. So again, my anemometer is accurate to within plus or minus 0.1 meters per second. So fans that are within 0.1 meters per second could be considered functionally equivalent. That being said, I do repeat testing on my fans, and I can verify that the positioning of the fans is where they are, even though fans could be considered functionally equivalent. They aren't functionally equivalent. There's a small mathematical difference, even though it's very, very minute. So the EK loop is in a certainly very strong position overall. It's just not in the best position, like the Tough Fan Turbo, Tough Fan 12 Turbo, the Mobius 120p, the T30 even is up there, the A12X25, they're all way up there in top performer category. Now, at 100% PWM fan signaling, again, same sort of thing with the McKee on the side. We have the fan name, the RPM it was running, and the noise level. So I want to find the A12X25 on this graph. I'm singing it. Oh, here's the A12X25 sitting actually functionally a little bit below. So it's only 0.1 meters per second under. But if you look at my graphs, so 0.1 meter per second could be as much as 10 watts or as little as 5 watts of extra power, which gives you some extra clocks. So it's your job to determine at what point is your airflow enough. And if you are using radiators and stuff like that, there's multiple fans, so may have a cascading effect. I want to actually add a radiator to my testing. I just need to find a good one. And so the EK loop is actually in a pretty good position overall, sitting in the bottom of the middle or top of the bottom, basically just right there in the middle with this sampling selection of good representative fans in every category. Mind, if you actually want the absolute best performers, you're going to be looking at T30, P12 Max, Mobius 120C, but mind, you have to weigh in how much noise the fans are going to be generating if you want to put up with it. Next up is cooler airspeed versus decibels, so how noisy it is for that amount of performance. And right here is the EK loop. So you see that actually starts off really quite poorly, and then it kind of catches up to, what's this one? I think that's the Silent 4 Pro. And then it kind of loses ground, jumps up, and then it kind of averages out okay. So it's not as good as I was actually expecting it to be, based on its blade design overall. I think the fan looks excellent. This CFM testing. CFM is just done by, the diameter or the radius of your tube. So that's feet in my case for the calculation. Pi, 3.14. So pi r squared is the surface area, the slice. Then you have the airspeed going through it. That's feet per minute. So feet per minute times feet squared is feet cubed per minute, or cubic feet per minute, CFM. Hooray, we're learning some math. So basically, I have my fan, I slap it up against a tube. The tube is the same size as the fan, and I blow air down it. Now, the reason I don't like this test is because if you're just blowing air down a tube, and this isn't quite representative, my fan is the same size, like I just said, there's no room for the air to spread out. So a fan that has a tendency to spew air off to the sides, the air has nowhere to go other than down the tube. So if you were to compare, let's say, two fans that were exactly the same, except one's frame design shot the air off to the sides while one concentrated it, they're going to look much closer in performance than they would in my case simulation test, because there's just nowhere else for the air to go than down the tube. There are a couple flaws with my CFM test apparatus. The first and foremost is my tube is too short. So it means when I put my anemometer, it fills up a large portion of the back area. So it actually creates some back pressure in it. So it's not a true open airflow environment. It's sort of halfway between looking at an air cooler and an open airflow environment, causing back pressure. So that is a disadvantage with my testing. I am in the market to upgrade my testing apparatus. I actually like the device a lot that HW Hardware uses. It's very cool. I'm looking at either having one made or something like that when I get around to, again, doing the whole revamp again, if we grow enough as a channel. But I don't really like CFM airflow testing for looking at case airflow. And the reason is exactly what I just said. It hides the fact that if a fan shoots air off to the sides, it just hides it. You're not going to see the data. They're going to look much closer in performance, and you're going to get a fan that isn't going to work the way you want it to. Now, if a fan produces 100 CFM of air and it's pushing 100 CFM of air into your case, that is true. But how it blows the air into your case matters just as much as how much. Because if it's not traveling anywhere, then it's not doing you any good. So that's why I created the case simulation test. And why I don't particularly like the CFM test. CFM is good if you're doing one of, I think, three things. If you want to make your own at-home wind tunnel, it's basically CFM. If you want to generate PQ curves for testing, generally testing data for how good a fan is in different pressure applications, like Noctua does, CFM testing is again what you want. And the last one is slipping my brain at the moment. Generating data for how air flows through your radiator, AIO, or even your heatsink. And actually, kind of the last way along the same lines is total airflow through your case. So a real simple example is my Fractal Design Torrent. Their air comes in the front and the bottom, and if I were to stick my anemometer at the back, I don't actually have a back fan, it's just open airflow because the back is so open. I could stick my anemometer and get a bunch of readings at a couple key locations and get an average CFM traveling out of my case. So you could get total airflow. If you're set up your case like a chimney, so the air comes in from the front and the back and then out the top, you could get total CFM traveling out your case that way to know how efficient the total airflow is. But unless you're doing something like that, CFM has very limited use cases for your case design. So all of that said, we're going to keep this really short for what we're actually looking at since I finished ranting and raving. We have my control, we have the EK, better fans are top left, worse fans are going to be bottom right. The left graph is CFM versus RPM, the right graph is CFM versus noise. So on the left graph, it's following my control fan very closely, indicating a good performing fan. And once again, on the right graph, the EK is underperforming a little bit. And how does it compare to everything else? Well, it's sitting more or less in the middle, performing quite well overall, I would say, but functionally in the middle. Definitely producing a good amount of airflow. At 100% PWM fan signaling, it moves up in the stack pretty well towards the top, functionally equivalent or very close to the Lightwing's 120, the Mobius 120p ARGB are all close contenders, but it's just a far cry from the 3000 RPM fans. They win by brute force. And next up is CFM versus decibels. The EK is, well, towards the bottom of the graph. It's not in a terrible position overall, but it is shifted towards the bottom compared to other fans in this sample selection. All right, let's move on to the next section of the video. So now we're on to the value proposition. First up, the EK is a $30 fan, so it's on the expensive side, which means you expect some premium features coming out of the fan. And I do want to note that there is an ARGB version of the fan, if that's something you're interested in, and it should perform very similarly. I haven't personally tested the ARGB one to know if it's exactly the same, and know that there is some variance between fan to fan, as much as, I believe, 10% difference. But, okay, so who is the value proposition most specific for? Well, if you're trying to squeeze every penny out of your build, you want the best bang for your buck. So that's when you'd be taking special note of this, and I'd actually only be buying my fans off of this data set. If you've got a little bit of extra budget and you want to get something either quieter, more performant, or you want a little bit of RGB bling in your case, well, then you would take this data and weigh in the other factors. So if it's RGB, the RGB effect, or the noise performance or maximum airspeed performance, that's when you weigh in those key factors from the earlier graphs and decide which fan best suits your needs. And if you've got unlimited budget, or money is not a question, then buy whichever fan you want. So all of that said, how does the EK look compared to the other fans? Well, I would call it in the middle functionally. However, the extreme outliers are just so much better than them that I couldn't recommend it as a top value pick. Mind, it's okay. It's just not a top value pick. The CL12 and then the top one is the TLG12. They are just top value picks. Mind, I cannot attest for any of these fans longevity. Longevity testing is outside my purview at this point. It's something I would like to do, but again, I need additional support in order to get myself there, to devote more of my personal resources into the channel, because buying all these fans has been a major deficit. Mine is something I'm interested in, so obviously I'm doing it for myself too. But all these graphs, noise normalized is going to be on the left side, 100% PWM fan signaling is going to be on the right side. So how does the EK look at 100%? Well, it's functionally in the middle again. Mind, the top performers are just still so much better than it that I can't recommend it as a value pick. Mind, even though it's technically okay as value. Next up is the 11-inch mark, noise normalized and 100% PWM fan signaling. And we see a very similar trend, except now the EK looks a little bit better compared to my sample set. And it continues that at 100%, but it's still just a far cry away from my top value picks. They are just so much better value that it's hard to recommend it from a value perspective. If you are going for its style or the RGB in it, then why not go ahead? It's not a bad fan. But if you're trying to squeeze every penny, get something else. In terms of how it's doing on a CPU AirCooler, well, here it's underperforming a little bit. I'd call it below the average, which is a shame to see because EK definitely uses this or a very similar looking fan on their AIOs. It's just a shame that the fan is underperforming just a little bit. So I hope that EK will continue working on their fans and make better ones in the future, because I think the styling on is quite excellent looking actually. But at 100% PDOM fan signaling, it's kind of in the middle, but not quite. So let's move on to the last one. The last one is CFM testing. Again, it's my least favorite, but it's functionally lower middle-ish. Yeah, I'm going to call it lower middle. So where does that leave us with the EK? Well, it's definitely a good case fan. It's an okay CPU AirCooler fan. I don't have a radiator to do radiator testing yet. So it's certainly okay, but there are just much better value fans out there, and there are fans that do better performance per decibel than it. So if you're buying it, it's because you like the RGB, you got it for quote-unquote free with your AIO or came with it, or I don't know. But it certainly isn't bad. There are just better fans out there. Let's move on to my wrap-up. As always, at the end of my videos, I like to show off my raw data. And the raw data you are welcome to use for your own personal uses. If you just plan on using it for yourself, you can record it down, make your own graphs, do your own analysis to just better decide for yourself which fan best suits your particular needs if you want to do a small samples collection. However, I do ask that if you're going to use it in any sort of publication, journal, or media basically, where it goes out into public, I ask that you reference me and my channel. I'm the one who generated this data. This data does belong to me, even though I'm sharing it with all of you. So do me that favor, and I greatly appreciate it. It does take me 1.5 to 2 hours to generate this level of data for fan analysis, and that's just the analysis part. Next, I have to update my graphs and make sure the data looks organized. I need to reduce the data set so that it looks simple for easy enough to read for these videos presentation process. And then it takes time to actually record the videos. I'm just letting you know because it's a time-consuming process and it is a labor of love for me because I love the data collection part. The hard part is what I'm doing right now. If you got fans you want me to test in the future, please leave in the comment section down below. If you got comments on how I can improve my videos, so constructive criticism only, I'm willing to take it and try to improve it for all of you. And if you've got anything else, questions, comments, concerns, please let me know. I'll try to help you out in making your fan deciding process better. Other than that, please have a great day. I'll see you next time here on Computer Tech and More.